I am 48 years old and I've spent years worrying about my own personal health. I have had issues with kidney stones. I have been diagnosed with having myocarditis. I've definitely had too much stress, far too much work, and I've also experienced a few years of being a little bit overweight. And despite all of that, I've never actually had a full medical check. And in this video, all of that changes. When you're young, you kind of just think you're invincible. I certainly have been guilty of that. And then one day, you find yourself, you're nearly at 50 years old, and you kind of start to realise that you've been avoiding finding out what's really going on with your body. So I've never had a proper medical, an MOT, a full health check. So I have booked in to have an entire assessment conducted, and in this video I'm going to walk you through every single aspect of what that process was like. I'm going to explain to you what the costs were like, where I picked to have this medical check done, the tests that were included in all of it, the results, the costs, and then a little bit of a summary at the end of all of this. This is the objective of this video. And so today I'm going to find out if everything that I think is wrong with me really is, and then I'm going to share those results with you. So let's talk about why now. Why did I decide now was the time to have this MOT health check done? Well, my wife and I are both 48 years old. We left the UK last year to permanently travel Southeast Asia. Before doing that, I had suffered my own personal ill health. I was having issues I didn't really know about at the time, which would ultimately become kidney stones. I had been at my doctor's and I had been diagnosed with having myocarditis. I was having pains in my chest, in my arms. And also at the same time, I'd watched my dad, my caregiver, the parent that raised me, a single parent by himself. I watched him pass away. He was a super fit man, did 2 walks a day, didn't smoke, hardly drank, and then suddenly ill health just took hold of him and I watched him pass. So in the almost 2 years since that happening, it sat in my mind and it's made me think about my own issues. And then just in late of last year, I arrived in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, and found myself deeply unwell. I ended up in hospital, had a kidney stone that I wasn't aware of, which required immediate and urgent surgery. And then following that surgery, I ended up with sepsis. I spent a number of days in hospital and battled through that. And it's really been a case of trying to get back to fitness, health levels, losing a little bit of weight. But ultimately, all of that has sat in my mind, making me think, is everything okay? Every little twinge, every little tingle has resulted in me worrying that something greater was going on inside my body. So why Malaysia? Why did we decide to get this health check done in this particular region? Well, there were a number of factors. We're currently here on a short-term tourist visa. We're passing through the region. I had already had a serious medical incident in this country, and I had to say that the care that I received during that time, the number of weeks that I was in and out of hospital, was absolutely first rate. The hospitals that we went through, the doctors that we saw, English was easily spoken, so it was clear to understand exactly what was happening. The medical staff themselves, many of them had trained in the UK and were super excited to tell me the doctor that I'd seen previously actually trained in Glasgow, my home city. So there were a few factors there, and also when doing some research we understood just how high a level the medical practice is here in Malaysia. So that gave us a lot of confidence in deciding that this is exactly where we would get this check done. Medical tourism really is a big thing here in this particular region, and Kuala Lumpur has some outstanding hospitals. That was part of the driving force behind making this decision. So how did we manage to choose the hospital that we went through? The simple answer to that was we just researched. We looked at a number of different facilities that were available to us. We looked at the packages that were on offer. We looked at how well rated the hospitals were. We looked at individual information that we could find online. And then we started to reach out to those hospitals. We were looking for things like the explanations of the services that you would receive, whether English would be a natural language so that we could understand exactly what was going on. We looked at the reputation, we looked at the costs of the packages and what were included in those services, and then also it came down to the ease of actually booking. And so in the end, we opted for a hospital called Prince Court, which is in Kuala Lumpur. I believe it's the 4th rated hospital in the area. And again, I had been through Gleneagles, which I think is the 2nd or 3rd rated hospital. But at that kind of level, you're expecting a professional, high quality service. So we picked Prince Court. We liked the package that was available, and also a viewer of this channel, Brian, who I'd met previously, reached out to me, and he had just gone through a very similar process and also had chosen Prince Court. He made a recommendation, so we weighed up the options and we decided that Prince Court would be our choice. Now let's talk a little bit about the fear factor. I think this is something that's worth considering. I'm going to be honest about this. It weighed heavily on my mind on the run up to this. All of the questions that were in my head, which were, what if there's something more serious going on with either me or my wife Yvonne? We both had this sensation of something's wrong, what if we've got cancer, what if my heart's damaged from the myocarditis, what if there's something longer term happening with my kidneys after the sepsis? These are all natural questions that were flowing through my mind. I'll say this much, my dad refused to go to hospital on the run up to him being seriously ill. He had his own reasons for that, and he kept saying to me, you go into hospital, you don't come out. That's really the crux of it all, and that has sat with me following watching him pass away in hospital. And making this decision wasn't easy, but you've also got to think about your own health and think about getting checks done the older that you get. So we decided we had to take this decision. Here's what happened on the day. We travelled to Prince Court, we booked a Grab taxi, we were booked to arrive for 9 AM. Yvonne booked the entire process through the Prince Court website. We communicated with them via email. They sent us comms on packages that were available, extras that were available. We also queried and quizzed on some of the pricing, just making sure that there was no hidden costs, registration fees, additional tax to be added on, whether there was any additional costs for being a tourist or a foreigner. All of those questions we asked ahead of time, and I'll summarise all of this in the end when it comes to the costs. But we asked all of those, we received the answers, and so we travelled there for 9 AM. Now, we arrived to the hospital about 8:30 in the morning. We walked through to the main reception of the health screening, and I have to say, it was a very plush location. It kind of had the feeling of a high-level airport lounge. If you go through first class or business class, it had that feeling to it, but more of a hospital vibe. There was a host as soon as we walked in the door who took our paperwork. We completed all of the screening documents ahead of time in email, and when we arrived we were handed the same documents on a clipboard, and we informed them we've provided it via email, and we were just told to take a seat. Many of the other people sitting around were filling in those forms. We did that in advance. Reception staff were there. There was a welcome desk and then also a payment desk that you end up sitting in front of later on in the day. So we took a seat in the waiting area from 8:30 in the morning and basically just waited. We were asked to fast ahead of time. It was a 8-hour fasting window, and we were to drink water, but no other drinks, no coffee, no sugary drinks, and of course, followed by the fast, no eating, no breakfast ahead of time, which we did. In terms of the atmosphere in the room itself, the waiting area, it generally just felt quite friendly. Most people were just relaxed, filling in their documents, having a look around, probably in the same mental position that Yvonne and I were in. Everybody thinking about, what does this day look like? What tests am I having done? So it was generally just relaxed, but with a slight hint of probably personal stress mixed in all of there. So let's run through the tests. I'm going to take you through each one of them, and I had jotted down on my phone the time window of each of these, and I'll give you a little bit of a summary of what went on. So we had arrived at 8:30, and by 9:15 we were still waiting in the waiting room area, the reception area of the health screening, and at 9:30 Yvonne and I were both called for our first individual tests. So we had an hour of basically sitting around waiting. 9:30 we went into our first consultation rooms. This was for a urine sample, which was to check your kidney function. So we both went off to separate rooms, private rooms, and we were handed a cup to provide a test, and thankfully I was ready to go by that point, having consumed enough water. So the urine test was taken, handed over, and then back into the reception area. Next up at 9:45 I was taken for an eyesight test, and this was a colour blindness test. Now, I am colourblind, my dad was colourblind, mixed colours, so they showed me a book. I was able to identify some numbers, but not all of them. I was then also given a distance test, right and left eyes, took a few minutes, and then I was out of that room. 9:45. 9:50 was taken into another room, and this time a hearing test. So I sat in a soundproof booth. I was given a button in my hand to press when I heard the noises. I had headphones on, and then it played sounds through the headphones, beeping sounds that would gradually decrease in volume over time, and I was to press the button at each opportunity that I could hear it. I did a individual ear test across the two, and that was it conducted. So that was at 9:50. At 9:57, I'm being very exact on this, I'm trying to keep this as accurate as possible to give you a true reflection. I went into another consultation room, and this time for a body fat test. So it was a DEXA scan, which I stood on and held two buttons in each hand with my thumbs pressed against it. Was on this for a few minutes, which basically did an all over body scan that required you to stay completely still to check I think it's like an electricity pulse that goes through you. Whilst also in that room, I had my height checked and I had my weight checked. Back into the waiting room, and this time my next call was to have blood taken. Went into a private room with a nurse, and she took blood from my arm. I have to say, the nurse in this room was super friendly. She gave me a very caring impression, was chatting, she was complimenting me on my tattoos and just asking me where I was from and how long I was in Malaysia for. She really put me at rest. Having my blood taken is something I'm a little bit wavy on. I have been known to pass out in the past despite having tattoos. It's just one of these things I'm a bit squeamish when it comes to. But she put me at rest. I think they took maybe 3 vials of blood in total to have various health checks done on. And this took a few minutes in time, and then we were back into the reception area. Now at this point, having had the blood taken, I was then in the reception area waiting to see the doctor. At 10:15, I was invited to the room to meet Dr. Nora, and she was a super friendly doctor who chatted to me. She asked me questions about my personal health. It was at this point that I was able to talk about a few of my conditions, particularly having kidney stones, having had laser surgery on those kidney stones the previous year, and also having contracted sepsis, having gone through all of that. So I talked to her about it. We talked about my recovery, my weight loss, talked about any other ailments that I'd had, and she listened. She then performed a standard health check, which was to listen to my heart, check over various areas of my chest. I did that lying on a bed, and again, I went there at 10:15 and was out about 10 minutes later. From this point onwards, 10:30, I was asked to relocate in the hospital to the radiology department. And at this point, I was going to have a few different tests done, a ultrasound and an x-ray. So first up was the x-ray. I went into an x-ray room and I had a chest x-ray performed, which was to check your bone density, bones alignment, the spine area. That's what I understood it was for. After this, I was sent off to the ultrasound department to have my bladder checked over. I had to drink a lot of liquid at this part, a lot of fluids in preparation. So they tell you to drink 4 cups of water. I was drinking throughout. 10:55, 11 a.m, I went into the room and I had my bladder area scanned as an ultrasound. Now, I had also had some issues in the gallbladder area, and it's part of this test they were going to scan it also. So they performed, I spoke to the doctor, I mentioned to him, I've had kidney stones, I've been in hospital, I'm worried about my gallbladder area, I've had some pains from that space, from that position, that I'm worried if I have gallstones or if I have sludge in there. So he scanned that area to talk to me as well. Now, at that point, he immediately said, following the scan, there are no issues there, nothing that I could see. So that really just put my mind at rest without having to wait any longer. At this point, I came back out into the waiting room, and 11:15, I was then sent in for a full bone scan. So it was almost like an MRI machine that was positioned over my spine area. And again, a bone scan. The nurse in there, or the woman that did the radiology, or whatever you call it, she was super friendly as well. She was playing Radiohead on a little speaker. She was playing Creep, which made me kind of giggle slightly because all I could hear in the background was, and I'm a creep. So just a little bit of fun in that. Back to the wellness room now for just after 11:30, so back to the main reception area. At this point, we were invited to go and take a seat in a separate waiting area that actually had tea, coffee, biscuits, fruit available. Now you've had your bloods taken, now you've had all of your urine tests done, you can now hydrate with some nice drinks. So Yvonne and I had a nice coffee, we had a couple of cookies. They ask you to do that because next up is the stress test, the fitness test. So at 12 noon, I was invited into the room to do the stress test. I had to remove my top, and I had all of the various nodes placed on my chest. I had an ECG scan now. This was relevant for me, particularly with having previously myocarditis. So I really wanted to focus in on this part of the test. So they did a quick check with it, and then I stepped onto a treadmill. Once on the treadmill, I was on this to go through multiple layers. So at first, a very slow walk with your hands on the machine. Then the machine would incline to a hill walk, and then it would increase in speed, and you were to go as long as you could until you reached 85% of your maximum heart rate. 178, I think she said for me, 178 for my maximum heart rate. So 85% of that, they would stop the test. I went 4 levels there before they eventually switched it off. So I was at a run on an uphill incline before I hit that measurement. So that will be different depending on your skill set, your fitness levels, all of those tests. And at that point, we were done. So I waited in the reception area. So from 9:30 to 12 o'clock, those were all of the various tests that were concluded. We were then given a voucher to go and have lunch in the reception area of the hospital. So we went out, we had a meal, we had some sandwiches, some fruit, a little cookie and some coffee each. And we waited. We were told to return back to the main reception area for 2 p.m. in order to get the results with the doctor. So Yvonne and I had our lunch. One little funny thing for everybody who's watched this channel in the past, it's seen me go through Gleneagles Hospital and mentioned that these hospitals are very plush in the reception area, and they sometimes have a piano and a pianist sit and play, and I've heard some great tracks while waiting out there. ABBA, Money, 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 and Que Sera, Sera were our past highlights on this channel. There was a pianist there, a young girl who was playing, so it was nice to just sit and listen to the calming music in the hospital reception. 2 p.m. we went back to the main reception room of the wellness centre, and we waited. We had a coffee again, and by 2:30 we were called in. Now, I'll say this much, I think this is probably the next period of time where the stress factor started to kick in. You're really thinking about what these results are going to look like. Okay, it's all over. Let's get At 2:30, Yvonne was called in. Just after that, I think she was in for about 15 minutes. and then I was called in for my meeting with the doctor. Dr. Nora, we sat and chatted. She was super friendly. She had also trained in Glasgow and spent some time in both Glasgow and Edinburgh, my main home cities being Scottish, and we talked about the test results. This is what the pack looks like. This is what you get. This is what she hands to you in that meeting. It's a document like this, which has all of your test results, all of the detail inside here, every single test that you went through, and then she summarises them with you. So when we sat down, the first thing that she said to me was that the results were positive. So you can imagine what's going on in my head, right? And she runs through each of the test results with me, talks about my height, my weight, talks about my muscle mass, she asked me, having had the hearing test, was I working in a loud environment? I've been a DJ before, I've been to lots of concerts, my hearing has definitely deteriorated. So she highlighted this to me. I'm no longer in that world anymore, but something that I need to take care of. And we went through each of the tests. Now, there was two things that really stood out for her that she wanted to cover at the end for me personally, and that was that my cholesterol was a little high, nothing too concerning, but a little high, and just something that I could focus on with diet. And also that from a osteoporosis perspective, I need to take a vitamin D3 supplements. And also, whilst out here in Malaysia and Asia, I'm getting plenty of sun, but she was cautious to say, don't spend too much time in the sun, take the supplement, just look after your bones. We did chuckle slightly, having come from Scotland, a particularly dark country, very grey, that I probably wouldn't have had much sun. So that was something to be mindful of. Those were the two elements that came out. So overall, a very good assessment as a 48-year-old man. Complimented me on my fitness levels, complimented me on my muscle mass, my general health was very good. The fact that I don't smoke, I very rarely drink. My kidneys were in good function, liver was in good function. All of the samples that were provided all had very good markers in them. So it left me feeling very positive at the end of all of that. All of the fears that I came into early with these tests had been eradicated, wiped away, knowing that I'm looking after myself and that I've had all of these health checks done. Yvonne has had very similar tests to me, only slight differences for a woman in her 40s. The packages that are available take into consideration your ages. She's waiting on one final test to come back that takes a little bit longer. So let's talk about the price of all of this. For the day appointment for a man in his 40s, the cost was 1,500 ringgit. That equates to £275. For Yvonne's health check, it was 1,650 ringgit, which came out to £300, so £575. There was a 50 ringgit registration fee and a 6% tax added on to all of this. So the total cost in ringgit was 3,445. Now, if you pay with a MasterCard, you get a 10% discount on the day. We did that, so after the discount, that came to 3,078 ringgit. If I tell you what came through on my Revolut MasterCard at the end of all of that, it was £566.79 for the two of us, to have those checks done. So the upfront initial cost is going to look like £275, 1,500 ringgits. Now, I'll say this much, there were additional packages available, there were additional tests. If I was to be critical of any part of this process, I would say that some of the communications were getting a little bit lost in translation. We were asking about test results, we were asking about tax, etc., and we weren't really getting the answers back in email. But ultimately, just looking at the prices that came through, we accepted that there might be a little bit of variant and we went with it. So we went ahead and did the tests. I expected on the day that when we arrived, there would be some upsell process, that they would offer additional checks that could be done. I was really interested in having, for example, testosterone checks to see what levels of free testosterone versus the actual testosterone that you're creating. I wanted to have those done. Yvonne was interested in having some vitamin checks, see what's going on, but none of that was offered to us at the time, and in the end we just didn't push that. We probably could have pushed it a little bit more and asked about it, but we didn't. We weren't really sure. So there was a little bit there that could have been a bit better. I would say in some of the tests that we went through, it felt a little conveyor belt style, just people going in and out of rooms. I highlighted earlier, the nurse who took my blood was super friendly. She was a real standout. The woman who did the x-ray scan that had the Radiohead playing was really friendly. The doctor, Dr. Nora, really great, really enjoyed the interaction with her. She seemed to really take time to talk to me about the test results, explain them, give me really good advice on my diet and just little subtle changes that we could make. She seemed to really give me the impression of really caring. In some of the other rooms, that was a little off in some respects. Felt, like I say, a little bit conveyor belt-ish, but didn't impact the overall results. Ultimately, I've got the paperwork here, I've had all of the checks done, and I feel really good now having cleared that out of my mind, and I can now focus on just getting back to living, eating well, training in the gym, and generally looking after myself. So I hope that gives you some information on what it's like to travel internationally, be in other countries, and think about what it's like to go through health checks. The biggest thing that I took away from all of this, I need to worry about my cholesterol levels. That's not what's in my mindset now. The biggest thing that I've taken away from it was just how much energy I was wasting thinking that things might be going wrong with me. And in reality, they aren't. So that's how I'll end on all of this. Thank you so much for watching this. You can leave me comments down below and I will read them all.